Hello everybody. If you haven't done so already, there's voting cards in the lobby at the registration desk. They're pink and you'll need them for later. We'll also have a chance to do that at the health break. And we'll get started right away here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Fox, and I am your president. First of all, safety, if everyone isn't aware, there's washrooms through these doors, and there's a hallway, so the ladies are on that side, however, you can get through this door with the hallway behind us. Exits are straight across and straight out to the far side of the parking lot for a muster. Yesterday, we had some interesting presentations. The key theme yesterday was changing boreal forest. And our speakers all demonstrated change and indicated where change was on the landscape. Whether you believe all the models, it's up to you. Whether you believe what the inputs are, it's up to you. But the reality is change is happening. It's measurable and it's visible on the environment. We had our trapper confirm that with his own trap line. The point is that if the change is there, it doesn't matter where it's going or what it is. It's best to try and do something about it. A little difficult in terms of, for example, one speaker spoke on managing change and assisted change. But the problem is, if you're going to plant a tree right now, 80 years from now in our careers and in our line of business, that tree is going to mature, but climate change is supposedly happening faster than that based on all the models. So how do you plant something that will survive at planting now under current conditions and also be viable 80 years from now? So there's challenges ahead of us, and it's all very interesting. It's going to be an interesting time in the near future. Along the same lines, our organization has to change. What's happening out there now is there are many people actively making decisions on the landscape, and they're not regulated professionals. As forestry schools have had low enrollment for a number of years, they're beginning to increase a little bit, but the demand is greatly increasing with the recovery in the forest industry. The predictions are that for the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to have record lumber prices. It's been a little slower starting than their predictions, but a good deal there. Given that increase and the mills that are starting up again, we're all employed, and anybody who wants a job has one right now. They're starting to turn to other education streams in order to get people to do the jobs that we normally would be doing. So what we're going to have to do as an organization is enable those people to become registered. The government and the people of Alberta want the people out there that are making decisions to be responsible. So along those lines, that's where our future, I think, is going. Today we've got a couple speakers to do some presentations, and then after that we will have our business meeting, hopefully winding up around lunch, some awards at lunch, and then a couple little presentations after lunch. So. If I can call on Mr. John Carpenter to come for our first presentation. Mr. Carpenter is BA, MBA, FICB, ICD, FCGA, Chief Executive Officer of the Alberta Accountants Unification Agency. This agency was formed to manage the transition to a unified accounting profession in the province under the National CPA Unification Initiative. So this is the kind of thing we're talking about 50 or Partnership Initiative Task Force, and what the government is talking about on their discussions of the umbrella. John was appointed CEO of the U of A in January of 2013. Previously, John was CEO of the Certified General Accountants Association, a role he assumed in 1995 after a 20-year tenure with a major Canadian bank. His banking experience ranged from small-town retail banks to commercial banking in Canada's largest cities, and from the small business startups to world-scale mega projects. At CGA Alberta, he led the organization through major changes in professional regulation and significant growth in students and CGA membership. John earned a CGA designation in 1987. He subsequently received a fellowship designation from the Certified General Accountants Association for Canada for service to the community and the profession, and is a CGA Life member. John holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Wilfrid Laurier and an MBA from the University of Calgary. He is a Fellow of the Institute of Canadian Bankers and a Certified Director with the Institute of Corporate Directors. John is past Chairman and founding board member of the Financial Planning Standards Council and the Canadian CFP licensing body. He is also founding Chairman of the Board of the Financial Planning Standards Board, the international CFP licensing body responsible for over 11,000 certified accountants worldwide. John teaches in a Bachelor of Commerce program at the University of Calgary. Thank you very much. John?
We're good? Great. Thank you. Well, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. I want to share with you, I understand that many of you are about to embark on what will be an exciting adventure in your professional organization. It will, I guarantee you, have some dark days along the way as well. As you've heard in the introduction, I've been at this for a little while. I spent some time thinking a little bit on the plane about that as I came up this morning, and in addition to some of the things I want to share with you, I think what's not here, and I'm just going to spend some time starting with it because it's so important, is as you go through this process, one of the groups that you're going to require some cooperation from, and I'll touch on it briefly as I walk you through the process, as you go through this process, you're going to require the support of the provincial government. And absolutely key. They control the existence of many of the professional bodies, and I know several of yours are no exception. What needs to override virtually everything I talked to you about this morning, having that in mind, is the public interest. And I think we always need to ask, as we redesign our organizations and start to talk about what we think is important and what we want to do, how does this fit into the public interest? So I think that's important context. So let me give you an outline of the experience that we've had. I'll talk to you first off about why Canada's 3 accounting designations decided to merge in the first place. You may say to me, well, John, I didn't even know there was 3. Okay, well, let's just put that down as one of the reasons. The process that we followed, the challenges that we faced, the things we've learned, and how we define success and where we think we are in that respect. So first off, the merger process. There have been merger discussions in the accounting profession around the world, certainly for as long as I can remember. The one that really, and most of them have failed. That's important to remember. The one that I can recall most recently before our latest effort in Canada was in Australia, where, and I don't know how many of you know Australia, but the accounting bodies in Australia tried to merge, and it came down to Perth. They lost the vote, the member vote in Perth. Now you know the distribution of Australia and how the population is distributed in Australia, so that's how close it got. There's been a history of failed attempts, and I've been involved in several in this country as well. So lots of discussions over a long period of time. In May of 2011, Canada's CAs and CMAs announced their intention to unify under the designation CPA, Chartered Professional Accountant. Now, just to distinguish that for you, you're familiar with CPA as it's used in the United States, and in the United States, CPA stands for Certified Public Accountant. Slightly different translation, but the fact of the matter is, the selection nonetheless of those 3 letters in the designation were not an accident. Nationally, the CGA body, which I was part of at the time, joined the unification process later. What you may find interesting, and I won't spend much time on it here, is in fact the Alberta CGA body broke away from its national body and entered the merger prior to anyone else, save for the province of Quebec. Professions under the Constitution of the country are provincially regulated. So every body, and if you think about this for a second, let's take roughly 13 jurisdictions, including the national jurisdiction, multiply it by 3, and you don't have one merger here. You got 39 to 40 parties trying to come to the table. So it was a very complex undertaking. Frankly, it's not a surprise that we've struggled with it to this point. So why merge? Why would we do this? All of the bodies were pretty prosperous. We had found our own spots. None of us were really suffering, but we were driven by this notion to go to the marketplace, to go to the public, to represent the public interest with one voice. We felt that what we wanted to do eliminated marketplace confusion over the differences between the designations. And I used to do this exercise with our members, and I'd say, okay, tell me real quick, what's the difference? And when you tell me what's the difference, you're not allowed to tell me how you got your designation, right? That's about the process, not the product. So tell me what the difference is. And over the time that I've been involved with this, it's got increasingly difficult to answer that question. So you start to ask yourself, all right, from the perspective of the consuming public, what are we doing this for? We also recognize that Canada, in relative terms, is a small country. And business is becoming increasingly done internationally, both from Canada and into Canada. So we took what was a relatively small accounting profession in our country, and we divided it by 3. So we decided that when we were going to go out and compete internationally, and accounting standards, for many of you will know, are now international. They are created internationally. So it matters in our profession. So we started off by tying one hand behind our back as we went out to create influence there, because it matters in a lot of industries, such as those that you're involved with, what accounting standards say. We went out and we hindered ourselves right off the bat. It helps us recruit people to the profession. It helps us bring people into the profession and continue to grow them through the profession. The obvious answer to this question, and most accountants, I suppose, would give you this one at the top of the pile: it reduces inefficiencies in governance and administration, eventually. What it does in the early stages is it costs a lot of money. But eventually, if you keep your eye on the prize, like any merger, you're going to get some of those efficiencies. Scale, and I differentiated these 2 concepts here because beyond simple operating efficiencies, it gives you an opportunity to do more, to leverage the capacity you build. So those are 2 different sorts of ideas. It strengthens our ability to service members, and the bottom one on this slide, and the most important one of all, is what I call the synergy dividend. And we had a process where we went out and we talked to our members across the province, and indeed across the country. And members would appropriately, remember they're members, they would appropriately say to us, so what's in this for me? That's a good thing, that's a good conversation. What's in it for members is if we get this right, all of those efficiencies can go into more relevant and useful services to our members, because we combine our knowledge across the 3 bodies, and we combine our financial capacity. So let me tell you a little bit about our process. What was key in our success is we started off with a common set of merger principles. There were merger principles that were agreed upon nationally. In our world, you hear everybody talk about the 8 principles. Don't ask me to recite them, that was a while ago. But it was very important at the beginning as we put together contracts. We consult and communicate with our members. We spent a lot of time answering member questions, telling us what we thought was important, and asking members what they thought. We also led our members, and this is important. The phrase on the slide is bound to be controversial. Let me tell you what the opposite looks like in order to explain what I'm talking about here. Mergers are tough. I'm going to come to that in a second. There's a lot of folks whose status quo gets challenged, and it's not just employees. A lot of folks get a status quo challenge. So you know what the easiest way is to avoid taking leadership if you're a leader? And there's lots of leaders. It's not just elected board, it's not just staff, it's opinion leaders within the profession. If you don't want to deal with it, the easiest way to answer the question is, well, that'll be up to the members. We're going to ask the members. And you hear that, we'll ask the members. Well, of course you're going to ask the members. That's table stakes. This is a democracy. You got to do that. But before you ask the members, what are you going to tell them? What are you going to tell them? Because if the leaders stop supporting this process, if the leaders are not active in this process, it will fail. Because members appropriately look to the leaders to lead them. So it's very important, as I say on this slide, not to really ask the members. Yeah, you got to ask them eventually. First you got to tell them. You got to engage all of the thought leaders in the process. Respect the importance of history and legacies. Now I'm going to give you an example. As you heard in my introduction, I've been a certified general accountant for a long time. Very proud of that. I never wanted anything else. And I don't feel compelled, despite the fact that we're unifying under a new designation, it's not going to change the fact that I started my professional life as a certified general accountant, and I will end my professional life as a certified general accountant. All of my colleagues from the certified management accountants and the chartered accountants feel the same way, and they should. So while we are unifying under a new banner, Chartered Professional Accountants, and while that is the only brand that our organization will market, we got nothing to hide here. This is not about trading the old in on the new. We're going forward under a new banner, and the organization will only support the new brand. But people have an immense amount of pride in where they came from. And there's really no good reason, if you agree on how the organization is going to position itself, there's no good reason not to continue to sustain that. Be decisive. As I'm going to say in a minute, there will be lots of naysayers. There's a lot of reasons not to do this. There's lots. I'll give you a big long list of reasons not to do this. There's better reasons, in my view, to do it, and you will deal with those in your profession in your own way. But don't be deterred if you get on track and you think you're doing the right thing. We did extensive member communications in town halls. I traveled the province on several occasions talking to members, understanding how they felt about this, understanding where they thought the risks were. Because we were asking them to support us. And I'll tell you a little bit about, at least, perhaps not the end of the story, but the middle of the story. We had an enormous voter turnout in terms of supporting our merger, and a resounding support for the merger once members understood what it was about. And think about the context of that. These people have been competing with one another, and we've had brands competing aggressively with one another. We said nasty things about one another for a long, long time. We were competitors. So it took a big leap of courage and a lot of information and leadership from across our leaders in the profession to support members in that decision. Respond quickly and aggressively to misinformation. Now, be careful about letting somebody else set the agenda. And politicians will talk to you about how not to necessarily accept the context of a question you're asked, because sometimes there's some traps there. But if misinformation is out there, and there was lots, you need to get on that openly and aggressively and deal with the misinformation. We use member polling. We frequently polled our membership to identify issues. And what's important here is there was different levels of merger engagement across this country. One of the great challenges we had in Alberta is the CGA Ontario body was firmly opposed to this and aggressively, and this is our biggest CGA organization, aggressively marketing against it. So we needed to get after the information that came out, and we needed to survey our members to understand how it was been responded to. One of the advantages of polling is if you're going to go after the misinformation, sometimes you know the phrase, "thou doth protest too much." If it's not a big deal, then don't make it a big deal. If it is, you got to get after it. Set up leadership groups that incorporated all parties. We consolidated the leadership both at the staff level and at the board level very early on. And we needed to not only have our leaders support what we were trying to do, but have them working and be perceived as working together. We went out to the membership and we identified champions within the membership. I'm sure that within your membership, just as there is within the accounting profession, there are people who are looked at as opinion leaders. We found them. And we found the people not only that were opinion leaders who were interested in this merger, but the opinion leaders who thought it was a bad idea. We didn't duck any of that. We talked to them. And very often, you've probably seen models of regulatory influence before, very often just talking to somebody, even if you don't win the argument, and let them be heard, puts you in a place where you can then occupy the high ground and continue to move forward. We stayed focused on our shareholders. I began by talking about the public interest. That was critically important here. We ensured that the standards of education and competency would be maintained, and tried to define standards from the perspective of who's impacted, the perspective of the public, the perspective of the stakeholders. Because what very often happens, as I'm sure you know in a profession, is standards become about a process. I recognize that good process is defensible, but a standard is more focused on the outcome. So we tried to make sure we understood what everybody was trying to achieve and adopted the highest standard. But at the same time, we exploited a lot of shared practices. What we found is three organizations that have been competing historically against one another for so long, it was amazing the extent of the convergence. We kept the government informed. We regularly went and met with government. I can remember early on, we would show up and often I would get this look about, what are you doing here again? We were always there. There was never any doubt. Nobody ever filled the vacuum in terms of our information. People knew who we were. We had some credibility when others came forward, and we had folks that came forward to government working very aggressively against what we were trying to do. But we built up that credibility, at least in terms of the smiling face that was sitting across the desk and quite transparently talking about what we were trying to achieve. Early on, we negotiated some operating protocols among all of the parties, and we codified each of the parties' commitments. More about that in a minute. Think about this for a second. You've got an important function, a function that the public depends upon, that people rely upon, potentially to their detriment. You know, I like to tell new members that not to forget that accountants' opinions move markets. That's pretty significant. That's pretty important. That means a lot to a lot of people. So what you're trying to do then is you're trying to unify these three accounting bodies, and you're saying to the government, okay, we're all in the boat together, give us the keys, right? Because the government giveth and the government taketh away. And this is in our legislation. So give us the keys, we're all merged together. Well, you better be ready in case you get what you ask for. And if you ask for control over those regulatory functions, you got to be in a position to take it over. You can't snap your fingers and have that happen. So the process that we followed is we created this animal called the Alberta Accountants Unification Agency. And the lawyers would criticize me for describing it this way. So in non-legal terms, it's essentially a joint venture. And it's a space that's occupied by all three of the accounting bodies. It's a transitional body, as it says on my slides. And we began to transfer assets, liabilities, of course, and operational responsibilities into the Alberta Accountants Unification Agency. And the day that our legislation is proclaimed, and that's a long process, the Alberta Accountants Unification Agency changes into CPA Alberta, and we are ready to take the responsibility that's been given to us. We're ready and we're operating. To date, the Unification Agency has developed its first strategic plan, budget, business plans. There is a transitional management structure in place. We've merged all of our work around business development, that's our word for recruiting, education, the regulatory functions, both practice review and professional discipline, communications, marketing, public relations, government relations, information technology, that's the expensive neighborhood, a function we call CPA Life, and I'll explain that in a moment, and an area, obviously, the infrastructure that we call corporate services. We're also in a place where we're planning premises. We have 3 locations now, 2 in Calgary, 1 in Edmonton, and we're figuring out how we're going to rationalize those. Having in mind something I referred to a few minutes ago, let me refer back to something that's on that slide called CPA Life. If we were saying to our members, this is going to be relevant to you, and the big synergy dividend here is actually for the members. I think the future of the profession is post-designation, because my profession, and I suspect like yours, is undergoing such radical change now. Accountants do so much more than we ever dreamed we would do. You know, I left bean counting behind a long, long time ago. So it was important that we be in a position where we can continue to be relevant to members through their entire professional life. So what used to be called continuing professional development, and there's all kinds of names like that, affinity type services, is now CPA Life. And what we're talking about there is we want to follow our members through their careers and through the various stages that they are in their careers. You know, I am an old accountant. My needs are different from somebody that has just joined the profession. Why should the profession be less relevant to me than it is to somebody who has just joined? So that's the concept behind CPA Life. It's an example of member relevance that I alluded to a few minutes ago. All of Alberta's post-secondary institutions are on board. We have rewritten our professional education program. That is an enormous undertaking. It has brought out the best of the 3. In fact, I'm going to say the best of the best, learning from the 3. So our professional education program is done. We built a new prep program, which is essentially a bridging program for people who don't have Bachelor of Commerce degrees or similar into the professional studies program. And we are hopeful that our legislation will be passed towards the end of this calendar year. Let me just sort of reflect back for a minute on where the challenges were. And I think this Will Rogers quote is a wonderful one. If you're looking for challenges, you're going to find them. And if you want what he calls parking spots, there's lots of reasons to slow down. The challenges. Not everybody arrives at the same point at the same time. You're going to go out and talk to members about this, and not every hall will contain raving fans. All changes involve some loss, and a merger is a major change. Something is going to be given up. Opponents will create obstacles. You can get buried in your paperwork, but invest in the paperwork up front. I can't tell you how often I've reflected on the documentation and said, I can't believe that's not in there when some point of disagreement comes forward. Staff cultures are real and very entrenched, and staff will perceive immediately, as they should, staff will perceive immediately, how does this impact me? The things we've learned. Move to consolidation quickly. Get ahead of the barriers and the naysayers. Build and maintain trust at the staff, member, governance levels. Don't think that you've got to give people a certain answer in uncertain conditions. You don't have it, they'll know you don't have it. Make sure that you tell them so and be as honest and transparent as you can, while still respecting obvious confidentialities in any professional organization. Members may get there first. You're going to have a constituency in the members that's going to assume this is all simple, and they're going to be pulling at you, why aren't you doing this? You've got to be communicating with them or you're going to lose them. Honor the old designations, I think I've talked about that. Build a leadership talent built on, build a leadership team built on talent, not old arrangements. Commit to listening to your opponents, I spoke about that earlier. Move quickly on disinformation, I always spoke about that. And keep an open mind, because this is an evolving process. A lot of it is new territory. It's certainly places that we haven't been before. Know your stakeholders. Make sure that you know, particularly the folks who can influence what you're trying to do, but also the folks who you serve. Who are your stakeholders? And remember, this is really bad news. I've said this to members all the time. They can work themselves into a real lather at some town hall meeting, and the answer that is true, but they sometimes don't want to hear, you know, guys, nobody cares but you. How does what we're trying to do impact the stakeholders and the people who rely on us? You got to calibrate it that way. And stay alert as you pull the organizations to hidden takeovers, because old processes can overtake new ones. You need to communicate regularly and openly with members. Keep your eye on the prize. And here's a good one, develop a thick skin. People are going to say things to you when you advocate a merger that you're not going to like. And they're going to personalize it. Stay focused on what's important. Find and follow the true believers. They're out there. Those are the opinion leaders can help you. And delineate the governance staff and working roles early on. We're hoping that this year the Government of Alberta will pass our legislation. Our goal is to continue to be relevant to our members, the people who employ them, and to continue to grow recruitment in our profession. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you. I got a couple of minutes for questions. I think I'm living on borrowed time here. The gentleman gave me the 5 minutes a while ago. Yeah, okay. Okay. I'd be happy to talk to you about what you've heard, if you're interested. Okay. I think that, as I understand what you're doing, just to say, you may have a smaller number of total members, but I think the merger that you're undertaking, the complexity shouldn't be underestimated. That'd be my one piece of advice.
Well, probably one of the first things I was doing is underestimating. We've only got a couple of professions involved.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I certainly see some similarities in what we're going through. And it's nice to see that the end is near for them. I believe we will be there soon too. Next to speak are a couple of people who are deeply involved in our mergers. And first of all, Ray Hills, who we have hired as a guiding consultant. And he's going to be partnered with Pat Gallup. I believe Pat's going to talk as well, who is, no?
I'm staying down here.
Okay.
I'll be available for questions. So.
Pat is our past president and is deeply involved in the Partnership Initiative Task Force. So take it away, Ray.
Okay. You guys hear me? Good? Right on. This is exciting stuff, folks, and I'm happy to be able to come and talk to you today about the work that's going on with the partnership agreement. And fill your boots with lots of information this morning. So if I've done my job today, if I've done anything, is I've helped you understand what the partnership initiative is and how it will affect you and who you are. And one thing I want to start out with is this. You know, we did some workshops. I'll touch on a little bit of the communication work that we've done. Is this, you know, this merger isn't about you. It's not you as an individual within this organization. We've had comments, both I think through the CAPF and CAPFT, is members say, well, what's in it for me? What's the value in it? What's the value proposition? And I'll be very clear. I mean, it's not about you. This isn't about individual benefit. It's not about individual value. It's about what's good for the college, what's good for the practice of forestry, and that's that's the focus. The public interest is paramount in this discussion and this transition. So I want to make that very clear. Now, we can talk about it later. We'll open up the floor towards the end of the presentation and certainly ask questions and clarity. But I just kind of wanted to touch on that because it very much is about the organization, specifically the practice of forestry and doing what's right for the public's interest. So today's presentation is going to be about the partnership agreement. So I'll talk about that in some detail. We'll talk about the amalgamation process. Talk a little bit about defining who we are, who we want to be as a single college eventually here, and then I'll talk a little bit about the ratification process. And I do have some question and answer material at the end if we have time. I can kind of run through that, but hopefully I've answered the questions you might have as I walk through my presentation. So the partnership agreement is, it was a formal partnership arrangement that was signed by CAPF and CAPFT back in May. So I think this time last year, Grant Williamson had come and talked to us a little bit about what was going on. And subsequent to that, in May, both colleges signed this formal agreement. And it's an objective-based agreement that its intent is to specifically merge or amalgamate the two colleges into a single entity. And I'll read to you from the agreement here, which is on our website, I believe. You can read it for yourself if you haven't already. The objective: amalgamate the colleges in order to pursue a more effective and sustainable model of professional regulation. The amalgamation must be done in a manner that meets the principles and key points that have been agreed to by both colleges, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So it's a principle-based agreement with specifically the desire to move the colleges into a single entity. So, I mean, I was hired to help the process along. This is about the yes, about making it move forward. There's maybe some feedback from members about, are we going to have a discussion about whether we do this? Well, we're moving in a direction of effectively making it happen. Ultimately, members will make the decision themselves through a vote, which I'll touch on later on. You will decide eventually whether or not this occurs. But specifically, we're working towards what this college would look like and covering off the terms of what that will look like through the process that I'm involved in. So PITFI, which is the Partnership Initiative Task Force, is the group that I sit with, myself, Chanel Wilkinson, Pat Gallup, as well as our partners, Grant Williamson, Doug Christofiak, and Robert Anderson from CAPF. So we are 6 members that sit in and are working through the material and terms that need to be completed to prepare you, membership, for this decision that will come within a couple months. And ultimately, like I said, it's to achieve a more sustainable model of professional regulation. Right now, we're governed through the Act. We're governed by a set of regulations that specifically are to regulate the profession of forestry. So why do we do this? Well, obviously we have inherent similarities between the two colleges. When I was here, I was here, 13 years ago as your president, talking about what was a really significant period is when we became regulated. I was here talking to you about the exact same issue. So today I'm sitting here 13 years later talking about a significant issue, which is the merger of both colleges. So we do have inherent similarities. Back then we had the similarities. We had 2 sets of regulations, and we operated under the same act. We work hand in hand, foresters and technologists, and the jobs we do, the businesses that we're part of. So clearly we have a common kind of scope and similarities. We've gotten direction and support from our public members to move in this direction as well. And ultimately, it's again, like I focus on the public interest. We can better serve it through a single organization than to have 2 separate organizations. It's a much more sustainable element, just from a business point of view, to have 1 entity versus the 2 we currently have, the redundancy, the overhead associated with that. And, we'll have 1 voice. We'll be the one-stop shop in terms of the college that are the folks that actually practice forestry within Alberta. So I talked about, I mentioned the idea of these principles. So when you go into a formal arrangement, you're looking at a merger or something as significant as what we're talking about, you have to start the discussion with, kind of a terms of reference. How are we going to negotiate that? How are we going to move in this direction? So the partnership agreement focuses on a few areas. I wanted to highlight a few here. One that has come up repeatedly through our communication with membership is this idea of scope of practice. How will that affect me? What does it say? Well, the partnership agreement was established that basically said, we'll continue and we'll maintain a common scope of practice. So the work you currently do within the context of your education, your work experience is what you'll benefit from and what you'll enjoy moving forward. So exclusive scope of practice, put it clearly, is not part of this discussion. The terms that we move forward is you'll continue to enjoy the benefits that you have now in terms of practicing forestry in the areas and fields that you have a background and a work experience to do that. It's an ethically based approach to practicing forestry. Retain titles. Through this partnership agreement, we'll retain the existing titles we have under the regulations, so RPFs and RPFTs. There's associated registers that go with that. Those are not points that will be negotiated. Those will be maintained through this work that we're doing right now. Clearly, there's a process review, a component that's a big part of this whole sustainability model is redundancy and duplication. I know, again, back in 2001 when we became regulated, when you clearly look at the statutes, they were almost mirror images of each other in terms of the competency models and the hearings and the complaints and all of this work that had to be done that is associated with being regulated. And so the opportunity now is to look at all of that eventually and create kind of a more efficient model of the things that you see on the screen, bylaws, code of ethics, etc. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Membership categories, similarly to the retained titles or the title protection, membership categories are a function of the acts and executed through the bylaws. Again, those will be managed independently, so RPFs and RPFTs will retain that responsibility to define the categories that are associated with their professional stream. So amalgamation process. When you look at the amalgamation process, you can't really go anywhere and say, how do you do this? It's a bit of sausage making, to be quite honest. Trying to figure out what you have to do to prepare yourself to go from literally two entities to one. And so what we'll talk about here is how do we get from here, which is CAPFT and CAPF operating autonomously separate, to where we want to go, which is there, which is one college that's self-regulated around forestry. And so I like schematics, so I'm really proud of this little chart here. So this is the partnership agreement, and it's all encompassing. So we have CAPFT, and we want to move in a direction into a single entity. So these are we'll talk a little bit about these elements here. There's aspects that we have to define now that moves us to a single organization, which is an amalgamated college. At the end, we may not call ourselves a college. We might have a different handle that we might want to apply, but ultimately we'll be a regulated entity, similarly to what we are now. And then you guys will decide eventually maybe what we call ourselves. Maybe we'll make some decisions more collaboratively as one organization, defining who we want to call ourselves. And then somewhere in there, which is not far off, is just going to be ratification. See, you're going to decide. We'll provide you information, we'll prepare you, and then you'll decide. And then we'll decide whether or not we move to the right of that line or we stay where we are. So the process, so again, two becoming one. So we have to start thinking like and acting like one college. And it's like a business, really, is you have to move from, if you're two organizations, two companies that become one buys the other or whatever. You have cultures, you have things that define yourself as two separate entities. And so we have to transition from that. And one of the ways you can do it is you can start thinking from a common front. And so we're going to have, and we'll talk about it today, a vision and mission that's common, a code of ethics and a standard of practice that's common, an interim governance component that exists because we are going from two organizations to one. I'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. Bylaw principles and new bylaws, which eventually leads itself to elections and really a functioning single organization. And then the final step when that happens is we'll amend the Act and corresponding regulations to reflect this new organization that we are. And you specifically as members, there has been opportunities for feedback on our code of ethics. Those are floating around standards of practice, as well as bylaw principles, new bylaws, and then the elections. Obviously, you'll have to say. So those are key areas that you're going to want to plug into and provide feedback to both colleges on what your thoughts are. And like I said, much of that is already unfolded already. So we're going to prepare you for the ratification vote. So you're going to need to know how amalgamation affects you as a force technologist. And so we needed to decide what needs to be done now before the vote and what can wait until after. You know, we're not going to have a fine print around what this college is going to look like immediately, and then you'll vote. I mean, we're going to do the key areas, what we believe are key areas that require that equip you for a good decision. So you need to understand who we are as an RPFT within this new college. And so what we believe needs to be accomplished now is looking at a little bit about governance. So we'll answer some questions around that, elections, code of ethics, standards of practice. Those are key areas that you're going to want to know now how you fit in within this new organization, and you can make an informed decision eventually on whether or not that's what you want to be part of, and whether you're going to vote yes or whether you're going to vote no. What do we think can wait? Well, there's a lot that actually can wait. I mean, functionally, we already operate with competency models and exams and complaint resolutions and hearings, et cetera, et cetera. So all these regulatory tools, they exist for us already. We've been operating with those for a period of time, as has CAPFT. So those are things that can wait. They're not showstoppers. They're not something where moving forward to this new entity, you necessarily need to know the fine print. It's going to probably look similar to what we currently have. And ultimately, when we vote, and if it's successful, you can be part of that process of defining what these new competency tools, these regulatory tools would look like under this new organization. The administrative structure, again, we're going to defer that. The new councils will make a decision on what the new administrative structure would look like. We have significant competent support right now through our colleges, our executive directors and registrars, and our administrative people. We're going to look at other organizations that have went through this process to see if we can well define what a good administrative model would look like for this new organization. A complete set of bylaws will wait as well. That might sound odd, but when you look at our current bylaws, the two sets between the organizations, they're actually quite similar. They're organized a little bit differently, but ultimately they cover the same salient points. And so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on those areas of our bylaws that probably need a decision now or a principle now, which we'll agree to and we'll sign off on, and that'll be provided to you to review. But really the complete set of bylaws will wait until after the amalgamation, or pardon me, until after the vote. And then the active regulatory changes and amendments will occur later on once we become one organization. So defining who we are. So like I said, there's been a lot of material that has been created defining this new organization. And if you have been, in essence, paying attention to what's going on, a lot of material has been communicated through. We had a series of workshops that we did last month. We walked around the province a little bit to talk about some of these documents, some of this information. We got member feedback. We've had webinars. We have a newsletter that we've communicated this through, and then we have our website that you can access information. So, you know, there's ample areas where you can plug into this process, and I would encourage you to do that. So I'm just going to walk through some of the material, and if you have any comments or questions, maybe hold those to the end, and then we can revisit some of this. So we do actually have a new mission and vision statement that was created and supported by both college councils. And the new mission statement for this organization would be serving Albertans by regulating, enhancing, and promoting forest leadership and professional practice. And similarly, the vision statement is forest leadership by regulated professionals who endeavor to maintain the highest professional standards of practice and levels of competence. So going forward, that's going to be our handle. That's going to be promoted on our website, and that's going to be the mission and vision statement that we will adopt. Code of ethics and standards of practice. This is substantial. I mean, this is a big part of who we are as an organization now, and this will continue to be a big part of what we are moving forward. So the Regulated Forestry Profession Act requires that we create, maintain, and enforce code of ethics and the standards of practice. So it's a requirement. It's something that we have to do as a regulated profession. So both CAPFT and CAPF will adopt these for the new college. So everything we're creating here, by the way, goes through PITFE. PITFE creates it. It goes primarily out for member feedback, most of the material. And council makes decisions. They review the material, they provide comment. And ultimately, the desire is to have both councils sanction this information so that when it goes to members to vote on a review as part of the ratification vote, they're equipped and they know that their councils are supportive of these new standards. And so that's happened to some extent. We have a pretty final draft right now that will go back to both councils for final agreement. And so the format's significantly different from the existing CAPFT ones, but the content isn't really. Again, our code of ethics are there to remain, to serve the public interest. That's why we have them. And so they're organized with 7 codes, supported by several standards of practice. If you were at the workshops we did in March, I painfully went through each one of those and we talked about each one of the standards and got some really good feedback, and we have adjusted some of those based on the feedback we got both through the CAPFT and CAPF workshops that were undertaken in the month of March. In preparing the code too, we did a fair bit of homework. We looked at not only our existing codes and standards, but we actually looked at other forestry jurisdictions in Canada to look at what looked good, what would work well with our organization. And like I said, the draft has been taken to membership for feedback and updated to reflect that feedback. So this is the preamble to the Code of Ethics. So this is I guess the introduction to the new code, and I'm not going to read it here, but you have it in your packages actually under Appendix J. And so the preamble for that, I just wanted to highlight some of the words that we think are important in the code. Is we are ambassadors and stewards of Alberta's forest resources, and we have significant responsibility that goes with managing those resources. We have a commitment to long-term sustainability, and we know that those resources provide significant economic and social opportunities for people in Alberta. And so with that comes, it's significant. We have a huge responsibility to represent the public's interest through the work that we do in the province. So the 7 codes, I'll just quickly go through them. Number 1 is the practice a high standard of forest stewardship. Number 2, pursue and foster public confidence in our profession. Number 3, conduct work with honesty, integrity, and competency within the context of our training and experience. 4, respect and acknowledge the contribution of other professionals. 5, take ownership or responsibility to develop the profession and support those working in it. 6, conduct activities with a high regard for health and safety of the public and our members. And then lastly, apply a principle of continual learning, professional development for yourself and for the profession. So I'm not going to go into the standards of practice. Those are in front of you as well. But what I can say about the standards are they form part of the Code of Ethics. They go hand in hand. And in essence, it's criteria that assesses our ethical conduct as members of CAPF and CAPFT. And they apply to everybody. Everybody who's a regulated member has a responsibility to follow those. They're enforceable through the disciplinary process. Like I said, there's 7 codes and the standards go with those. They were updated for member feedback. And one of the key pieces that we got through the workshops was this idea of making them practical. So we have to be able to take these codes and these standards and really filter them. If there's a disciplinary process that's justified, how do you articulate that to the member, and then how do you walk that through a disciplinary process if they're pie in the sky? So what we try to do is revisit some of them to make them more practical or discernible in the context of that. And I think we've done a reasonable job. We've abbreviated them as well from the first iteration. So I think what we have now are a pretty good set of codes and standards. Bylaws. So this is the meat and potatoes of our organization in terms of how we govern ourselves. So the new bylaws are necessary to allow for the election of a new council, and they have to be ratified before the new college can be effective as one entity. And so it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. the idea of these bylaws. You know, even after the ratification vote where we decide whether or not we want to merge with CAPFT, we still can't. We have a set of bylaws that we're beholden to. We have to operate under those bylaws, and they reflect us as an autonomous organization. So we have to move in a direction of creating a common set of bylaws through partnership with CAPFT that eventually will be voted on by membership at a second vote later, probably, I would suspect in the winter time or spring, early spring. And that will empower us to make a decision or to be able to elect a new government and in essence amalgamate more formally with CAPFT. Until that happens, we in essence have to operate discreetly as an organization because our bylaws require, our business requires us to do that. But there's opportunities to continue to move in that kind of merged direction. Like I said, we'll remain autonomous in terms of areas of our business, even if we say yes to this ratification until the bylaws are established. That being said, there's an opportunity to be more coordinated through our relationship with CAPFT, and so that's a little bit about this interim governance, which I'll talk about in a minute. So, you know, if we vote yes in what likely is going to be June, there's still opportunities for the two colleges to operate and function more in an integrated, coordinated fashion. This interim governance is permitted through our bylaws. So there's opportunities within our bylaws to create these committees for resolution that allows our executives to work closer together, which I'll speak to shortly. So we're working on an MOU right now that is going to enable this interim governance. And so that'll allow our two colleges to make decisions on behalf of this semi-amalgamated organization, just for select areas of their business, longer term business. So where we have day-to-day business, those decisions likely would maintain the focus of the council. But longer-term decisions that would influence, say, the practice of forestry or budget or any kind of indebtedness like that would be run through a joint executive council. It promotes regular meetings between councils so that we have better integration and interaction between councils, specifically in core areas of our business of competency and hearings where we can start sharing information and start thinking longer term. It talks about one window communication. So again, as we merge together and we start thinking of ourselves as one entity, it gives an opportunity to think and communicate both internally and externally. So we'll move to one strategy fairly quickly internally for membership. So we won't have CAPFT webinars, CAPFT 3 as an example. We'll have one. We'll move to a single newsletter. We'll drop our newsletter out to CAPFT to a single newsletter. So there'll be one source of information between the two organizations. And should we have to communicate externally, that'll be a coordinated fashion so that we attempt to have a spokesperson or a one window external to the organization. So this MOU will also have a bylaw principle component. Like I said earlier, one thing that we have to talk about is, you know, are there aspects of the bylaws we need to decide now, or at least principles around how we'll establish those bylaws later on, so that we know how we want to create those bylaws. And so PITFI talked about, okay, what do we think are, in essence, showstoppers? What are ones that our membership might have exception to and want to know or have an answer now instead of waiting till later on? And so we thought there weren't many, but you know, there's a few: scope of practice, governance, specifically around elections, council makeup, and membership categories and protected titles. So we kicked around, you know, these bylaws and came up with some principles. So when you talk about scope of practice, the document itself talks about acknowledgement that practicing forestry is a privilege, which it is in the province, and we're a regulated profession. It specifically addresses our two colleges with mutual respect, shared responsibility, a partnership, and recognition that each college's members can and will practice forestry now and in the future. An ethically based approach like the partnership agreement has, where we have individual skill, personal skill, education, and work experience that really drives the areas that you're going to practice forestry. And ultimately it reflects the public interest. That's why we're doing it. So the other areas was of the principles we wanted to establish now was the governance, specifically council. So when you look at CAPFT's current structure around council structure, we have obviously president, vice president, past president, we have finance, and those they make up the executive of the officers of the organization. But we also have very discrete directors, which you're going to find out this afternoon, as we recruit and elect member complaints, competence exam, etc., directors within our council. We also have an CIF non-voting component in membership. So what we want to do in this new organization is similar, but a little bit different. We're proposing potentially that we would have the same president, vice president, past president of finance as a executive officer component. But what we'll do is we'll move to seven generic directors. They would be elected into council. And it's a model that is adopted from CAPF, and it's a more effective model. It allows council to allocate workload and share responsibility. If you look at our current structure, complaints, hearings, they're pretty quiet jobs if there's not a lot going in that area. Traditionally, there hasn't been. So this model, having generic directors, is I think a more effective way to allocate work and share responsibility in the administration of the work that the college has in front of it. So that's our recommendation, and that's what we're going to propose to membership when we go through the ratification process. It does have one additional director as well to address all areas of business. And like I said, council will assign kind of the portfolios of the responsibilities after the election. So that will be council's business, not the membership's business, and how that gets allocated. There are alternatives. We talked a little bit about at the workshops about maybe having specific directors again, but we don't necessarily think that's the most effective way to move this new organization forward. So it's not one we're proposing to members. Elections. So again, you're familiar with what we do here. We have a vice president we elect annually, and we have director positions or council positions we elect annually as well. So we have, they're typically 2-year terms, elected on odd and even years, and the presidency is basically a 3-year commitment, going from vice president, president, past president. So we're not really proposing significant change to this. That's kind of the position we want to take forward. We also believe that an open democratic process is the best way to approach this. There is a little bit of discussion about maybe minimum representation. So PITFI is going to talk more and get council feedback on whether or not initially, maybe the first few years of this new organization, that we would have a minimum number of RPF or RPFTs on council to address specific issues associated with being an RPF and RPFT within the council if you don't have that representation. It wasn't the original recommendation of PITFI, but we'll seek feedback from council, and we'll represent that position in the final package that you'll eventually see. In terms of bylaws, the last component is around membership categories and protected titles. So the other recommendation PITFI has for you to consider is that we'll retain the membership categories we currently have within our regulations. So we have registers for foresters and technologists. We have protected titles that go along with that. And we're really not suggesting we want to change that. I think going into the merger, we're going to retain the titles that we have. Our PFT will maintain the registers and the membership categories associated with that. And the other thing is that the influence or the changes to those categories will be the domain of forest technologists, and equally foresters will influence that. Those two professional streams won't influence the other in terms of the categories and the decisions on how to change those or if to change those in the future. So that'll be another recommendation that PITFI will carry forward. Like I said, there was an alternative to this is, we could open up a membership would make a decision on that as a whole, but that's not a position that we're going to take forward with a recommendation. So bylaws, path forward. This is, again, a bit of a chicken and egg. So what our recommendation to council is we'll develop a bylaw committee after the ratification vote, if it's successful in September, if we can accomplish these timelines. I think we can do that fairly quickly. We have a couple set of bylaws that are reasonable templates right now that we can work from. So I think that can happen, yeah, very quickly. We'll get out like we did with the workshops. We'll get out. We'll get member feedback. You know, and this is going to be a real workhorse item. It's going to take a lot of communicating with membership, and I would really encourage you, when those opportunities arise in the future, to get engaged and provide feedback to whoever it is that's walking around presenting this material, to get your feedback. Because the key thing here is we'll develop these bylaws, and they're going to go up to membership, and then you're going to vote on them. That'll be another vote that's going to happen in the wintertime. And so the tricky thing is, if one organization votes in favor and one against, it you know, kind of puts us in a holding pattern until we get these bylaws revisited or changed. So we want to get them right the first time, and I think we can do that. So again, I would encourage you and your colleagues that you work with to get out and provide feedback to those people that are soliciting it when that time comes. So we'll vote on those potentially in the wintertime, and you know, possibly this could be our last AGM as CAPFT, quite literally. If we can pull the bylaws together and have them ratified for membership, we will in essence be operating as one organization, and the next AGM would in essence be a merged one, where we could elect a new council and start acting and conducting ourselves as a new organization, which would be pretty exciting. Ratification process. You're going to, like I said, you're going to decide. It's your decision, and so if we've done our job, we've equipped you well enough to make a decision probably in June here. And so you're going to, about 30 days before that, or maybe more, you're going to get probably an electronic copy. We're calling it an amalgamation or ratification package. So it's going to have a plethora of information. It's going to have a final version of a code of ethics and standards and practices. It's going to have the MOU. It's going to have all this information that you can review and see what this organization looks like, and whether or not you think that's good or bad for the organization and as an individual. And then you're going to be asked to cast your vote. We haven't kind of figured out the particulars. Likely will be an electronic vote over a period of time, maybe a couple dates or maybe a short window. It's going to happen in practical terms at the same time as the foresters. So we don't want any kind of like election stuff like we have in Canada, where Eastern Canada votes and nobody knows what goes on, and then you start tweeting your buddy and you're like, hey, look what happened. So we're not going to do that. We're going to have it all at the same time, and we're going to release the results of that all at the same time, so we have a good synthesis around whether or not we're going to become a merged organization. And so the question, folks, drum roll, this is the question, or a very close proximity, is do you support the merger between CAPFT and CAPF to allow for the regulation of the profession as one college? That in essence is going to be the question, nothing else, and you're going to vote yes or no. And if we have the right number of votes, we're going to proceed. If we don't, then council has a tough decision in front of them how we proceed or review. And the same thing is going to happen for CAPF. So we're going to have identical processes. We're going to have seamless process of voting and making a decision, and then we'll provide you feedback on whether or not we were successful in doing that. If we've done our job, we've equipped you. There shouldn't be too many answers or too many questions you have about what's going to happen if we've done our job, and I hope that we have, and we'll do that. And yeah, so that's about it. That's all I have today in terms of the merger strategy. Is there any questions? I have a bunch of kind of individual questions, but I think I've answered most of them. One thing we have is you'll get in the ratification package is this kind of Q&A thing. I don't think it's in your package here today, but it's kind of, pardon me? It is, yeah. So if you look in your package, these are the questions I was going to address now, but very simple questions, around, a little more clarity around some of the points I touched on today. So I'll open up the floor to questions. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ray. Thank you very much, Keith Ebbs. I know that this is a one-step process, and certainly we need to get one step done before the next. But was there any consideration between the two colleges that we would take it the next step and include agronomists, biologists, and turn us into an environmental college? Because we've seen certainly a clear reduction in the dichotomy now between white zone, green zone. Right. We're practicing on both sides of the line from Medicine Hat to High Level. And what's the next step or what's the future for us there?
Well, that's a good question, and this afternoon, we're going to talk about umbrella legislation, which might answer your question, Keith, on that. The partnership agreement is specifically between the two colleges. There's a larger initiative looking at umbrella legislation that considers biologists and chemists, and I don't know if we want to address that question now related to that.
I can address it. The CAPFT process led us to get together with the foresters and meet with the biologists and chemists and the professional governance unit of Alberta to start discussing, since we would possibly be opening up our act if we merged, this would be the best opportunity to try and bring some of those other professions into, a professional regulation, mandatory registration sort of situation. And so that's where we started at. Through those discussions, there has been further discussions on, what possible governance models would look like, what possible things we share in administration and all those sort of things, but it hasn't got to the level of the CAPFT side of it. We've decided that this is the one that we're kind of leading on, this is the one that the membership really pushed us towards, realizing that there's opportunities with these other professional, or these other professions that there's opportunities to maybe go that route. And so we're it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing, once again, sort of thing.
Thanks, Pat. I'm with CCI out of Cochrane, and in our shop, we've got an equal mix of biologists, chemists, soil guys, foresters, techs. So even within our shop, we really have an overlap of the sciences. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the side of the government, the professional governance unit, they realize that also that, forestry just isn't forestry anymore, biology, this isn't biology. We got numerous different types of educated people practicing all these different disciplines, and really the only ones that are regulated to a high standard level right now through mandatory registration and everything else is the forestry discipline. And so we want us as the forestry discipline, want to see everybody else out there that's making decisions on the land base be regulated to the same level. And I think the public wants that also, and that's what we're hearing from our public members. We're hearing that from the biologists and the chemists that sit at the table and their public member, that they want that also. But the government wants that too.
Because I think we have a lot more work to do. When you think of forestry, the practice of forestry, and you think of the interest of the public, so we have foresters and forest technologists doing what they do. They have a scope of practice, and they have now responsibility through the regulated profession to do something about that. But we still have a lot of people out there that operate or practice forestry that don't have those educational streams, and maybe they have an educational stream, or maybe they're just, I was talking to some people yesterday about, we work alongside a lot of people who have either worked in government or forest companies and have, done the same job for a long period of time. They're really good at it, good decisions, but they're still operating on public land. And I think those are the areas that we can continue to pursue in making sure that, for the purposes of regulating a profession, we look at opportunities to be inclusive and bring those people into the organization to make sure that anybody who's working on forested land too is operating within the scope of practice that we have under our statutes and are representing the interest of the public. And why wouldn't we bring them into this organization through some mechanism? And so, that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, we're trying to get to the point where we can merge and become and act like one organization. But I think there's opportunities to really look at other areas to embrace other people that practice forestry on public land, on forested land.
Gary?
What's the total numbers for membership for the foresters?
Well, that's a good question. 750.
And we're at about 635,
Regulated.
yeah, regulated, so 700, total members. So it'd be a college of close to 1,500. So it's a pretty even split. Getting back to Ray's earlier comment just before this about being able to bring other people that are practicing within our scope of practice that aren't being regulated and don't have a a spot to be coming to the college. At last year's AGM, we talked about how we're going through getting our regulations updated through the government. And one of the key aspects of that was changing kind of, right now we bring those members in as associate members, but they're not, regulated. They're non-regulated members and that kind of stuff. To change that so that we can bring those members in through, the force technologist and training process, through writing the exam and that kind of stuff, to become fully regulated members. That regulation has now been approved by your council and is going back to the professional governance unit so that they can complete their work on it, which is consultation within Alberta and with our labor mobility partners. And then hopefully out of that, then it's going to, going to the legislative body for approval on that. So that's very exciting. It allows us to bring in all those members that are out there on the fringe, become regulated like we are right now. So.
One of the other things I wanted to share with you, and I think it's important, is so we did 4 workshops, and we went around the province. We went to Whitecourt, Edmonton, Athabasca, and Peace River, and so unfortunately we only had 3.4% of our membership show up at all of those sessions. And so here's the quandary for our membership, is if that's the kind of turnout we get, or the kind of feedback that membership provides, we're going to go to a vote in June, and you're going to decide, membership's going to decide whether or not we proceed or not. And so if I'm sitting on council, and this goes to a vote and our membership votes, council needs a resounding yes or no from membership. They need a substantial number of people to vote on this important issue. And if our workshops are an example of the type of feedback, the apathy that our membership are providing, it's going to be a pretty tough decision to make as council whether you proceed if you only get 5, 10, 15% of your membership voting on this key issue. So I would really encourage you in your workplaces, wherever you are, where you have other technologists, and foresters for that matter, encourage them to be part of that vote, yes or no. I mean, I'm not going to just let you vote where you want, but we need a substantial number of members to vote, so it makes council's decision easy on how we proceed with this merger idea. Because if you don't get an adequate number of people, it's going to be a real kind of lukewarm approach to potentially an important issue. So I just leave that with you, that let's really show support through the vote anyway on whether or not you support the merger. Okay, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ray. What we heard from John and Ray, key is public interest. And the public interest is monitored and represented largely by the government, so they need to be kept informed. I hear that from both sides. The interesting thing about the public is if they see somebody as deputy minister, a forest officer who is doing a presentation somewhere in their community, they meet a company representative in the field, whether it be forestry or oil, they're not going to say, are you a professional forester or are you a professional technologist? And yet both colleges have members doing all of these jobs. So I don't think that this amalgamation is anything out of the ordinary. The public doesn't perceive us differently to start with. And John made the point that you define yourselves by what you do, not by what your education stream is. So I think somewhere in the near future, hopefully we'll be operating under one banner. Prior to the break, I just want to mention that, as said before, there are voting cards out on the table. After the break, we will be entering into the business meeting, so please make sure you have voting cards when we come back. So 15-minute break. Oh, we're going to do some giveaways. Damon Riddell. Is Damon? There. One more. Mike Miller. Your names are now no longer available. Okay, thank you. Back in 15 minutes, please.